Today we're diving into a really fascinating and pretty controversial modern theory about biblical prophecy. It's one that completely shifts the end times map away from Europe and plants it firmly in the Middle East. You know, for hundreds of years, one of the biggest puzzles in biblical prophecy has been this: who exactly is the Antichrist? And where on earth is he going to come from? It's a question that has fired up imaginations and, you guessed it, a ton of different theories. For a long time, especially in the West, the go-to answer pointed straight to Europe. The idea was some kind of revived Roman Empire, maybe a powerful version of the European Union, would be the Antichrist's base of operations. But the theory we're looking at today asks a pretty bold question. What if that entire foundation, that core assumption, is just wrong? So, to even begin to understand this theory, we have to kind of reset our thinking. The first piece of the puzzle requires us to look at these ancient texts through a completely different lens. One that challenges that very Western-centric point of view. And this right here, this is the bedrock of the whole argument. The author basically says, listen, Western readers often get it wrong because they forget the Bible isn't a Western book. To really get what its prophecies are about, you have to read it the way it was written, with its focus totally and completely on Jerusalem, Israel, and the Middle East. And that leads to a head-on challenge to that popular Roman theory. Prophecies in the book of Daniel talk about a final kingdom that would crush the empires of Babylon, Persia, and Greece. The argument goes, historically, it wasn't really Rome that checked all those boxes. No, the power that actually did that was the historic Islamic Caliphate, a much more precise fit, they argue. Okay, now we're getting to the really mind-bending part of this whole thing. It introduces this idea of a prophetic mirror. It claims there are these incredible, almost shocking parallels between the key figures in Christian and Islamic end times beliefs. First up, we have to meet the key players from Islamic tradition as our source lays them out. We start with the Mahdi. He's Islam's awaited messianic figure, a powerful caliph who is expected to unite the entire Muslim world and lead it to global victory, often through war. And on the other side, the villain of the Islamic story is the Dajjal. He's painted as this ultimate deceiver, a false Jewish messiah who will trick millions and even claim to be God himself before he's finally defeated. And this is where that mirror concept just clicks into place. The source claims the biblical Antichrist and the Islamic Mahdi are almost perfect matches. Both are said to rule for 7 years. Both establish a global religion. Both make a peace treaty with Israel. Both ultimately conquer from Jerusalem. And then, on the other side of the mirror, the biblical Jesus shares some uncanny traits with Islam's great deceiver, the Dajjal. It's a shocking comparison. And this whole mirror image idea gets even clearer and frankly more jarring when you look at the role of Jesus. The source points to Islamic traditions which say that when Jesus returns, he's not coming back as a savior for Christians. Instead, he will return as a follower of the Mahdi, and his mission will be to abolish Christianity, break crosses, and enforce Islamic law on everyone. Alright, so if the characters seem to line up in this mirror image way, what about the places? The actual map? Well, the next part of this argument is all about taking the nations from these ancient prophecies and finding them in the modern world. You see, biblical prophecies in books like Ezekiel and Psalms list out very specific nations that will team up against Israel in the last days. And the key takeaway, according to this theory, is that these aren't just symbolic names. They refer to real places and real groups of people that the original writers would have known. So what happens when you lay those ancient names over a modern map? Well, this is where it gets really interesting. This interpretation argues that you don't end up in Europe. Instead, Magog lines up with modern Turkey, Persia is obviously Iran, Kush is Sudan, and so on down the line. The final picture isn't a European confederacy at all, but a coalition of modern Islamic nations surrounding Israel. Okay, on to the final and maybe the most mysterious piece of this whole prophetic puzzle, identifying the powerful, wealthy, and corrupting global force from the book of Revelation known only as Mystery Babylon. So to figure out who this Mystery Babylon is, the source material basically creates a checklist, right? A list of clues from the text. This city has to be in a desert, but somehow also connected to rich sea trade. It's called a global hub for false religion, a seducer of world leaders, and a brutal persecutor of true believers. So you might think Rome, maybe New York City. Those are common guesses. But this theory throws a curveball. The prime suspect identified here is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. with its spiritual center being the city of Mecca. And geographically, it seems to fit. Mecca is a city in a desert, but it's just 50 miles from the huge Red Sea port of Jeddah. But what about the religious part of that checklist? Well, the argument is that Mecca is, without a doubt, the spiritual capital for over 1 billion people, drawing millions of pilgrims every single year. The theory argues that the rituals performed there, centered on the Kaaba, fulfill the Bible's description of a global center of idolatry. And then there's the influence, the money. How does it seduce the world? Well, according to the source, since the 1970s, Saudi Arabia has poured over $100 billion into exporting its super strict puritanical version of Islam, Wahhabism, all across the globe. And that massive financial campaign, in this view, is how modern Babylon fulfills its role as the seducer of nations. The argument then connects the dots, claiming that this exported ideology is the direct root and inspiration for violent jihadist groups, which makes the kingdom, in the words of the prophecy, drunk on the blood of the saints. So let's just boil this all down for a second. The theory rests on 3 core pillars. 1. The mirror, the idea that the biblical Antichrist is a mirror image of the Islamic Mahdi. 2. The map, the claim that prophecy's geography points to a Middle Eastern Islamic coalition, not a European one. And 3. The money, the argument that Mystery Babylon is modern Saudi Arabia, funding a global ideology. So at the end of the day, whether you find this theory convincing or not, it definitely leaves us with a pretty provocative question. Could the lines between these ancient religious texts and our modern geopolitics be way more direct, way more literal than most people have ever assumed? It's a powerful thought to consider.